And I can say that. If this is a pal, this is my fellow Philharmonic brother. And anyway, Arnie is a long story, but the short version is that this is one of the most alive human beings / musicians / adventurers that I've ever seen. I have not laughed harder in anyone's presence but for this man. I thank him continually for introducing me to the wonders of Carl Hyacin. Very well read and curious. Always very curious about things and constant inspiration this way. Anyway, Arnie's curiosity led him to the original manuscript, Histoire du Soldat. Histoire, not Histoire, Histoire du Soldat. And many revelations have been found by Arnie, and that's what this class is about. My pal, Arnie Ladder.
I have a long history with the piece, kind of some of it checkered and some of it better. I played it originally when I heard it originally when I was still in Juilliard, and played it at Juilliard, and Jean Morel was the conductor at that point, who was actually Stravinsky's percussionist in the 20s and 30s in Paris. In my adolescent know-it-all, I never asked him about anything in the part, and decided that, well, I'm going to learn it myself and play it, the way I want to play it. I subsequently recorded it, and shortly after the recording, realized that there was so many different printed versions of the piece. And over the years, I kept finding more and more and more versions of the work and saying, well, wait a second, is this the high drum, is this the low drum, is this, what drums are they referring to? So what happened was that at the time it was written, World War I had broken out, literally ravaged Europe. It was a land war, and if any of you have been to Europe, you know how close the countries are. So basically you could go cross Belgium in a day, literally. And you just take a wrong turn and you go across the French border. And the countries are very, very close together. So that when the war, the First World War hit there was just tremendous turmoil. A lot of people killed, a lot of soldiers killed, but it was also a cross-fertilization because there were a lot of, for the first time, probably, American soldiers on European soil in great numbers. And there was a great interest in jazz at the time, which a lot of the black American soldiers brought to Europe. At the same time, in about 1917, the Russian Revolution broke out. And Stravinsky had left Russia before that, was living in Western Europe, and then decided to live in Switzerland. Most of, I think, his family, estates, whatever monies he had in Russia were confiscated. Again, tremendous turmoil, invasions. They really didn't do, with all that, a lot of concert performances. Nobody had time. People were warring. People were at war, being drafted, etc. So what happened, Stravinsky had a circle of friends in Switzerland. And among them was Ramuz, who was a contemporary of Stravinsky's, who was 32 years old in about 1918. They had a group of painters, a group of dancers, a group of actors, and they decided that they want to get a little gig together to make some money. And they said, well, you can't get an orchestra together. Why write big orchestra pieces? You can't get an orchestra together. There are no halls to play in. So let's just do this little kind of chamber music piece, and we'll adapt it to the local circumstances, get the group of friends, the one was a dancer, director, etc. And Stravinsky literally was very hands-on kind of atmosphere. They wrote the script for it, they painted the sets for it, They composed the music, and a group of friends actually played it. Stravinsky admits to the jazz influence, although he claims he never heard jazz, but his only quote knowledge of jazz was devised exclusively from copies of sheet music, which seems like really improbable to me, because it's like, could you learn to play rock and roll by looking at sheet music of the Beatles or the Stones or something like that? It seemed really implausible. And I had done some research on it and found that there was a tremendous amount of jazz activity in the early teens in Paris, although there were, from the turn of the century, a lot of activity in Russia itself. And there's a marvelously funny book called Red and Hot that's actually a history of jazz in Russia. And if you ever get a chance, it's really good to read. So the Histoire ensemble is just like a band, a Dixieland band of the period, with violin, trumpet, trombone, clarinet, bass, and drums. And the only thing that was added was the bassoon that Stravinsky said was his equivalent of the saxophone. And about the percussion part, he says, the part must be also considered a manifestation of my enthusiasm for jazz. I purchased the instruments from a music shop in Lausanne, learning to play them myself as I composed. There's also a marvelous picture in the James Blade book that shows Stravinsky sitting in his studio, and on a shelf above it are all these drums. It's hard to tell exactly where the snare drums or timbales, but there's a whole slew of drums, so obviously he knew a lot about the mechanics of playing the drums. And if you think about it, the setup here is really just a 4-piece drum set. A snare drum, 2 toms, and a bass drum. And it was very, very conscious. The instruments that were available, a lot of people have said, well, there weren't that many instruments available, so he used whatever he can. So I Xerox, with the compliments of William Ludwig, this page from a 1912 Ludwig catalog that I think is in that folder that you have. And it shows, quite interesting, like Ludwig alone made 6 different size snare drums at that period, way back when. Okay, so you find that they have a 6.5 by 15, a 5 by 15, a 4 by 15, 6.5 by 14, 5 by 14, and 4 by 14 available way back then. There's also on another one of these pages the typical drum set of the period. This is the professional outfit, 1 and 2. And you'll see that there are kind of tacked on tom-toms, a bass drum and cymbal attachment, a suspended cymbal, woodblock, snare drum, tambourine came with it, a rattle and holder, Chinese toms, another tom, where I don't see what that is, but it's listed, and an 8-inch triangle, castanets, 8-inch tambourine, with stands and the whole equipment. So way back then, they had, drum sets available. So it's not the kind of thing where you really didn't know what he was doing and wrote for this imaginary drum set. The thing that you must give Stravinsky credit for, though, is probably this is the first piece that uses a multiple percussion setup. And writes for a setup which subsequently, later on in the 50s, 60s, 70s of this century, became much more prevalent, over the less pieces of the Stockhausen and, etc. More types of percussion pieces. There was a funny letter from to Stravinsky from Franz Romay, who was one of Stravinsky's favorite conductors, and dated September 25th, 1918, asking him to, quote, bring your bass drum and cymbal to Lausanne because the instruments here are inferior. So they actually, new instruments, new good sound, had plenty of instruments available to them, and knew a lot about jazz. The mallets, again, was something very confusing to me. When I first played it and subsequently recorded it, I didn't know what all the mallets meant, and I basically used green sticks, for the green Goodman Tiffany sticks, for all the tom toms. So it sounded kind of like this. When I went to Vienna on one of the Philharmonic tours, I went to an old music store, and I said in my best German, haben Sie einen Timpani-Schlägel, and she understood, and opened a drawer and pulled out a whole bunch of really junk things, sort of broken handles and some crazy furry things and a pair of these. And I didn't know what they were. And I got home, and of course I started hitting things with all these sticks. So I started hitting the timpani at first, and didn't throw me, nothing so unusual. And then went over to a tom-tom, and I hit it. I said, that's the sound that I've always imagined Histoire. And so I brought this to a person that makes felt, and I said, what do you call these? And he looked at it and said, oh, that's K-pop. And I subsequently went back and found out that that's what Stravinsky calls for, which is, a K-pop head and a rattan handle. And the sound, it's so light that you get so many high overtones. And no matter how loudly you play, you'll never get a real. As opposed to. So it's so fat. And another tour, I was in a music store in Spain, and I found this mallet. And again, I just hit something and realized, well, that's what they call maillotche, leather-covered theater. That's the literal translation in the Goldenberg book, with a wooden handle. And to me, this is you get a really bottomy kind of sound that's almost impossible to get with any other kind of stick. Amy Putnam had been working with Gordon to make a replica of that stick and come up with this, which is very similar. It's a little too light in for my hand, but Gordon likes it because it feels like sort of playing, 4-mouth. I'd rather it a little bit heavy, but then everybody.
Look up the heavy version.
Yeah, there is a heavy version.
Just happen to have.
It's got the same handle though.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah.
There is more.
This is not my favorite bass drum. But I actually like a little, about a 26 maybe, with a damper inside, like a typical jazz bass drum. And I sort of hear that sound. It goes, bop, 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 bop. Something that matches the same sound. I think this is too bottom like this. Okay, now another problem is with the printed music, because there are so many editions of the piece. What happened was it wasn't published until 1924 or so. So there was a good 6-year interval that music wasn't published. At that period, too, the copyright laws were very, very flexible. And so there were lots of bootleg kind of editions of the work, of all of Stravinsky works, the typical canvas edition. There's a reprint of the Rite of Spring and a lot of the early works simply because Russia didn't recognize the copyright laws. And so all the music published in Russia could be easily reprinted. So many, many errors crept into the score, and more as time went on. Typically, one of the recent editions was the Music -1 edition, and instead of 3 tambours, they called for 3 tambourines at the end. And so things kind of got confused like that, and since there was very little control over of the edition, things kind of got, kept getting mixed up. Another problem was that the edition in the Goldenberg book, which I learned from, leaves out all the footnotes regarding performance techniques, which are quite elaborate and interesting. I don't understand why there are a whole bunch of subsequent revisions by percussionists that most of which left out all the footnotes, the performance notes. So there's Chester in 1923. There's some notes, not many but in French. James Blade, 1987, has his own version. The Bill Craft, 1965, there's no footnotes at all. The Goldenberg book, there's no footnotes at all. Frank Epstein's 1995 version, there's no footnotes at all. George Gaber's edition, no footnotes. John Godoy, no footnotes. The librarians of the New York Philharmonic made an edition up for Augusta Bailey. There's no footnotes in that. Charles Delancey in 1972, there are no notes. Ben Leloff, no notes. The Music -1, I'm not sure of. And Gordon Gottlieb's working on a new edition, which has a... If you get a chance to read that article, which is reprinted from one of the percussion magazines, it'll outline how I realized that there were all these inconsistencies in the parts, printed parts and parts that I had seen. And when Stravinsky died, there was an exhibit of his manuscripts up in Lincoln Center. And I went up there hoping that I'd be able to see the original manuscript. And I asked the librarian about it, and they said that unfortunately that's in a private collection, so it's not available to be shown in the library. And I said, well, would you know where it is? And she just pulled out a book, which I was shocked at, and just opened it up and said, oh yeah, we can tell you any piece you want to know where the manuscript is. And she said it's in this collection in Switzerland. And the Vogel Holding Company. And I assumed it was a publisher. And I wrote a letter to them saying that I'd like to take a look at the score, and I would even pay for Xeroxing or copying a copy of the score. And I got a letter back saying that they don't copy the scores, and it's rare material, but if I were ever in Switzerland, I'd be welcome to come and see it. So I thought, well, when I'm ever going to be, in Switzerland, a few years later, I was asked to teach at an institute in Montreux. And I said, well, Switzerland's a small country. How far can it be, like a winter tour? It turned out it was just, Montreux was right practically on the Italian border, and Winterthur is virtually the furthest north that you can get in the country. But I called them up, and they were very nice and said, oh, sure, please come. And I managed to take a long train ride and get there, and found out that it wasn't at all a music publisher, but it was a major international business, a holding company. And it turned out that the owner of the company, Werner Reinhardt, was the man that commissioned Stravinsky. He was Stravinsky's patron in that period in Switzerland. And, times were so tough but this guy was giving Stravinsky money to write pieces. And he was an amateur clarinet player. So Stravinsky wrote in that period the Histoire and 3 pieces for clarinet that he wrote for this Werner Reinhardt. Finally, they were very nice to me, brought me into a room with sharpened pencils and tea, and brought out this manuscript. And there it was in Stravinsky's own handwriting in 1918 edition. And so I was able to, I took a Calma score and write in all the corrections according to this 1980 version. And it's, you know, it's more elaborate, the trip, and so I outlined in the article. You can read about it. The amazing thing was that the score was so crystal clear. And I still find it confounding as to why all these problems have crept in over the years. Because basically Stravinsky was very clear on what he wanted during that period. Now, he might not have had access to that original score when he wrote that, edited that edition in 1923, which was subsequently published. Not Boozy Boys, published the 1923 edition. So, but another thing that was problematic is the translations. So, if you say, it actually in the original called for 3 cas clairs. Okay? So, cas clair literally means clear drum, right? But does clear mean without snares? Does clear mean high? You know, what does it mean? And then, in subsequent editions, they started calling them tambours. And so all of a sudden somebody had said, wait a second, there's a tambour and a cas clair. So they're just, what do all those drums mean? Another problem is that the Europeans, of course, do metric system. So the sizes of the drums are going to be different as well. What's a medium drum, what's a large drum, what's a high drum? It's very hard to tell. In the original, he says 3 cas clairs, large size, medium size, small size. Crystal clear. There's a whole bunch of footnotes, performance notes about how to play the parts. I'll read them to you as we go over piece by piece. Yeah, so lots and lots of these problems have crept in. Subsequently, Gordon and I have gone over a lot of this thing, and I took my original Goldenberg copy and just fixed it up. Oh, the other thing that's really problematic. Lots of times, I'm sure if you've looked at the card, you know that the low drum is written on the top line. So it's the low drum on the top line, medium drum, and then high drum, the T-tail, the highest drum, on the low E. You say, wait a second, that's a mistake. Why is that? But then if you think about it, the Europeans play the timpani the opposite way. So their low drum is on the right-hand side. So basically what Stravinsky was doing was writing, this is your right hand, going to play the low drum. So when I found that out, I had learned all the licks, just the opposite, going bass drum low, medium high, like it looks visually. So when I realized that, I said, gosh, am I going to learn the whole piece over again, And then I decided, well, wait, simple solution, just switch the drums. So I'm going low, high, medium, low. Bass drum, high, medium, low. So, and that's only because of my, having learned it in one way. Now, if I were learning it probably from scratch, I might reverse the drums and actually change the parts. Okay, now, I've even heard, since there's so much confusion, what's a high drum? And what does anybody think of as a high drum?
Higher to the lower.
Yes, that's a relative term, right? But some people, I have a recording where the player uses bongos on it, and get real pitch differentiation. Now, Stravinsky himself says that there shouldn't be that much pitch differentiation. He said it should blend as required. Yeah. Okay, Stravinsky writes, the pitch of the drums is extremely important, and the interval between high, medium, low should be as nearly even as possible. So not whereas you get a bongo that pops out at the really bottom bass drum. The performer must be also careful that no drum exerts its own, quote, tonality over the whole ensemble. So it shouldn't, I think bongos is really the wrong thing, only because the tonality is so clear on a one-headed drum. Now I've done it also using two timbales and a snare drum. So I use a low timbale, a snare drum, and a low timbale. Only because I like the clarity that you get on a timbale. But again, is it two-tonal? You have to question that aspect. Okay. Now, we'll start working through movement at a time. Now, on the Soldier's March, let me read you the footnotes that are missing from most of the parts. Okay. Stravinsky writes, hold in the right hand a mallet with a cane handle and a capoc head, and use this one to strike the tambourine and contraplayer. In the left hand, the mayoche is to play the bass drum. Now, again, start revising things. I don't happen to like the sound of a tambourine hit with a mallet. So what I do is, actually I play it like this. I put the tambourine on this drum, and I hold in my left hand, so I'm going So I'm only singing this with my hand, and the middle drum with the stick. Not what Stravinsky says, but I happen to like that better than. Not so bad. Maybe I'll change again. There's kind of a justification for changing things in the piece. Stravinsky, in fact, says that with the libretto, the text of the piece, that it should be changed according to the political climate of the area. And during the Vietnam War, there were versions with Nixon, President Nixon as the devil, and lots of different versions. And that, Stravinsky, I think, maybe not politically, but would have been happy with the fact that people did adapt the piece. The basic ideas there, evil, triumphing, and, seducing the returning hero, who was the soldier returning from World War I. So that possibly, I think Stravinsky would have possibly condoned some of the new ideas. And in fact, did when the hi-hat was used by Bill Kraft in the 1960-something recording, Stravinsky did say he liked, although the hi-hat wasn't invented till the late 20s, probably 10 years after this piece was written. Okay, let me play a little bit of the piece. Should we do it with the tape? Want to rent the tape? there's a stage crew, a stage cue in here, which says the length of the hold ad lib. So probably is a curtain coming up, people walking onto the stage, is a little overture. So you keep vamping. The curtain comes off. But up. So that's what it means by the length of the whole ad lib. So do you hear that there's the bongo in this thing that sort of pops out? You know. Okay, now in the next, in the printed part, there's the March of the Soldier, part 2, and it's virtually the same as the first movement. That's not in the original, and it was subsequently added for some stage effects again. Now there's also, I don't know if any of you have heard, there's practice, this piece lasts maybe 20 minutes. There's an hour version of it. Did you ever hear that? That's sometimes done. And somebody wrote a big translation, and they repeats huge sections of the music over and over again, and a lot of dialogue was added into the piece. And I just sort of, one of my students did this on a recital, and he was from Arkansas, somewhere down south, and he did the devil as a southern preacher. And so I think it relates well to, individually the way you see the piece. Okay, now the March Royale. As much research as I've done, there are certain problems that I haven't felt that I've really solved. And maybe the next generation will come up with some solutions. The symbol problem here. So it's this, it's written. Supposed to be marched. The symbol is ringing all over the place. And how do you get rid of it? Well, one solution when I recorded, I hired a muffler, a cymbal muffler. And someone just went, okay, and I could get a nice cymbal sound that way. Another solution that I think probably Bill Kraft was the first one to do it was using a closed hi-hat like this. So I find it a little, it's okay, but it's a little jazzy. Another solution that I've used is a little paper-thin cymbal and a lot of washers pressing down like this, so you get, which is not bad. You need a stand and you get washers on. And you can squeeze it down, I sometimes put a little metal washer on the top. And, there's the... So it's kind of nice sound. Now, there were cymbal mufflers made over the years, and I have a couple of graphics of that. Okay, again from the Ludwig catalog here is the alternator, whatever that means, in playing position. So there was kind of a gadget that was, this one, that was attached to the bass drum pedal that muffled the cymbal. Okay. So that was one possibility that people might have used. There's another one here, the Ludwig patented cymbal muffle. Over here, this one. Okay. So it was basically kind of a string attached to this muffler on spring steel, and the string was attached to the rod of the bass drum pedal. So when you hit the bass drum, it went this way, and when you came back, you pulled the string tight, which muffled the cymbal. So that's another possibility. Sonar in the Sonar catalog, let's see here, another possibility, whereas this was a very early kind of a hi-hat on this one, hi-hat arrangement, is it. So basically you're doing, pressing your foot down and pressing the cymbal which activated the string that hit the bass drum as well. So there were, and this is 1890s or so. Now also I've read about it in vaudeville, the minstrel shows, they had taps on, they call it a tap board, and they actually had taps on a piece of something that might be a slapstick kind of effect with string, and when the minstrels all sat down, they would all move these kind of tap boards, and they could actually tap, which I think was kind of, it seems like it's a precursor of the hi-hat sound. So there were lots of possibilities around. And I haven't, to my satisfaction, yet answered the question about, exactly what Stravinsky meant with that symbol. There's another letter that's kind of funny where Stravinsky complains about the 1935 recording that somebody did on RCA Victor, which I've never heard, but saying that he used a bass drum pedal on the bass drum. So obviously Stravinsky didn't intend to be a pedal bass drum. But exactly how negotiate the cymbal, I'm not sure. Now, there have been lots of people that played the piece, George Gaber and Bill Kraft, and Gordon played it with Stravinsky's companion, theoretically would know something about it. And each one claimed that Stravinsky actually signed my part and loved what I played. But now this was 40 years after the piece was written. So I really don't think he remembered, very active, performing creative career, remembered exactly what he wanted way back in 1918, when he was 32 years old. Now we're talking about when he's 65 or 75 years old, and now people are coming up with all kinds of different additions. So that's one of the problems that I'm not really convinced about. And back in the early 20s, they didn't even have a hi-hat like this. They had what was called low board, which was this low, that you couldn't really hit. It was a foot activated kind of cymbal. And the hi-hat, when they raised it, wasn't until the late 20s, so a good 10 years after Stravinsky wrote the piece. Okay, now, to get around the stick changes in the march royale, what I do is use, I don't know how anybody played it, originally using the sticks that Stravinsky calls for. It calls for mayoche and wood, and then going to K-pop. And so I do it like this, holding sort of like a formal thing. So I start out, tune goes like that, and he says, mayoche on the down, and you can actually get that sound. Now, the next problem comes up when you have a snare drum part at number 14 with snares on. This is the only place where there are snares on in the whole piece. So in the Goldberg book, he calls for 3 tambours and a casclaire with snares. But it's not necessary. You can do that with drums. So one of the solutions I came up with is you got to get it just right? This way. There's probably you've done it this way.
Arnie, explain what you just did.
Oh, okay. All right. So I had, I'm holding the sticks, just like you would in marimba, right? Formalities. Okay, I played it. And then 2 mayoche parts like this. our K-pop parts. Back to the Mayosh. Okay. Now, when you have to switch, you keep one stick over here, turn on the snares here, play snares. 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 2, 1, 2. Okay, so I pick up the one of K-pop here, I leave it here while I'm playing with my right hand. Back to Mayosh, the Adam out. So it's a nice little technique, to use it. I really don't know how they did it, in original. Were able to do it. There's also kind of a strange anomaly at 14, that snare drum part, in all the versions, and nobody explains it, has 6 notes. It looks, originally I thought it was a 5-stroke roll. I thought it was a 5-stroke roll. It turns out it's 5 grace notes plus a quarter. So then when I realized that, I started playing like an American 6, like this. And it's kind of awkward, it doesn't really feel right. And then if it felt too late, I just said, well, I'll leave out one grace note, and I'd rather opt for it in time and play a straight 5-stroke. But then I was on another Philharmonic tour. I found a book on Swiss drumming, and they said that they do all the grace note patterns in Swiss drumming with an added flam in the front. And you know that Swiss drum? Well, heard about it, yeah. And I don't really know how to play Swiss drumming, but that kind of made sense because then you play a 5 with a flam, and then you got your 6 grace notes. And it turns out it's a 6-stroke roll. And it's very close to a 5. And it seems to work, it doesn't get too far behind. If the conductor took a fast tempo, I would think out for a 5. To get it really in time rather than being late and get all the notes. Now, the confusion about this movement, because the cymbal now is on the top line. The cymbal is on the top of the part. And the drums keep jumping around. But this is correct in the original manuscript, but within the context of the piece, each line is correct. It's contradictory in some other movements, but within each movement it's correct. We try it? Now, hand playing with records, I'm sure all of you do, but kind of it's a way that you can hear the music because it's kind of restricting as far as, really playing the piece. Also, when you're playing with records, don't get crazy if you can't come in the first note with the recording or after a hold. It's really not important that you catch those things because with a conductor, it's getting down the easy. Okay, so all that means
Arnie, for some people who aren't familiar, also translate the center edge.
Oh, okay. That's the sound that goes boom, boom. The bass goes boom, boom. And Stravinsky, I mean, it's a great little thing. And double with the bass, you sort of hear it almost like a tonality. And he calls for a center and the edge of the drum. So that alone, I mean, is really so remarkable considering it's 1918. Okay, the Petit Concert is just all bass drum. Oh, yeah, to go back to the March Royale a second. There's a lot of very strange beaming of the notes in it. So, for example, number 2 goes bum bum da 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 like that. And which was what I had referred to at the very beginning, how he'll write a bum ba 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 bum ba ba ba, but now it goes bum ba 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 bum ba 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 bum ba 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 bum ba 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 bum 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 ba ba ba. So it's bum ba 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 bum ba ba ba, and it goes over. The rest of the orchestra is doing all kinds of changing meaning things, and he keeps that pattern going, like a 2/4 pattern going. So what I do is I just find that confusing to read. I know exactly what he means. I know how to phrase it, I think, but I just rewrite it in sort of normal writing, you know. You know, I find it, I don't know about the rest of you, I find it really confusing reading over the bar line. So my eye sort of trained to group, you know, in sort of even multiples and not group over the bar line. So I just sort of lose my place in the bar where it is. So I just take white out and change it, you know. And if I feel it's really significant, then I'll write phrase marks over it. So I know where it is, but this way I don't struggle to read it. You know, I don't know if you agree, Danny and Gordon, about, I really want my part to be as simple as possible. There's a lot of factors that you're involved in when you're playing. You know, you're going to hit the drum, you're going to pick up the right sticks, you're going to listen to the ensemble, watch the conductor, listen if the fiddle player starts to drag a little bit, you know, not push to keep up. And least of which I'm concerned about is how the music is written. You know, I'll study the phrasing and try to figure out where the lines go, but just write it in the simplest possible way so I don't really have to think about it, you know, that aspect. So you find, yeah, for example, at the ending, just, you know, to get to that a second, I just, you know, all this stuff, the stems up, stems down, you know, if you're familiar with the part, it's really confusing. I find it really strange the way, you know, to read that. You know, it's like the vocal part. If you can, I can't read vocal music. You know, I find it so difficult because my eye doesn't visualize where the rhythms are, and I see just a string of eighth notes or 16th notes not beamed together. So I find that really difficult. And so I just said, okay, I'm just going to write it out in plain old normal notation. So I got a shot at playing it right. Yeah, I was just saying before about the nice orchestration of that bass drum, you know, edge center sound. Now in the Petit Concert, it's again, it's written kind of strangely because it's all on one line, but it's just bass drum. This whole movement is bass drum with the bass drum at the center and the edge again. There's a kind of a mistake at the end where it doesn't specify the drum, but it's supposed to be the large size, and the dynamics are in error also, where it's double forte, forte, double forte. It's all, every note is supposed to be a single forte. Not in the original score. All that, by the way, all this is in the article. So if you want to check with your Goldenberg book, you know, have some time, you'll find it. Okay, now the tango, the notes are really interesting. It says generally marks for the percussion or the tango. The player has the mayoche of the bass drum in the left hand, and in the right hand, a kapok mallet with a cane handle. The notes with the stems off are played with the right hand with the kapok, and those with the stems down are played with the left hand with the mayoche. The cymbal attached to the bass drum is lightly struck at the edge, only with the cane handle of the kapok. Now that's really important, because before I knew this, I tried a million different cymbals, and I could never get a sound that I liked. Somehow, just till I hear it blend and work. So, and as soon as I realized, wait, what you're supposed to do is this, then almost every cymbal works. Even this works. If I go like this, it doesn't work. See, it'll just gives you that nice thin sound, you know, just with the handle, and you go like this, and it's just sort of too fat. You know? It's like the difference between a C trumpet and a B flat trumpet. You know, C has a certain thin kind of piercing sound. B flat is fat. You know, Straps, not Stravinsky, B flat, jazz kind of sound. So you do. Now the other thing I found, again, this is my particular thing, that the mayoche, when you cross over, so this is what Stravinsky wrote. He wrote it. You're supposed to play the drum with the mayoche, and it's just too big a stick for that. Now even no matter what drum you use, you know, let's try this a second. Doesn't work. I mean, I don't think any of them work. I think that's just maybe he had a particular kind of mayoche, or maybe it was just a miscalculation. So this one instance, what I do is I use a carved kind of equivalent, you know. So.
Would you ever consider using the mayoche or holding both mallets with your left hand? Just like the bass drum with mayoche.
Oh, okay. I haven't thought of that. All right. Okay, let's see what happens. So, and what do you do in this mallet? Yeah, because it's this, yeah. So
No, you would hit the snare drum with the timpani mallet.
Oh, yeah, so. Very nice. Great. I like it. But that's what's so much fun about this silly little piece, you know? There's so much to do with it, and there's so much imagination that, you know, you could try. It's a great idea. It's terrific, because then you get this on the bottom, and you still get a nice contrast, you know. You gonna make me practice these? Another wrinkle on it? Okay. And also, the way I don't know if Stravinsky intended this, but the way I see this, the three dances, which is a tango, a waltz, and a ragtime, are really kind of mock, you know, Rudolph Valentino, you know, type tangos. You know, so, you know, somebody with slick back hair and doing this exaggerated, you know, kind of motions, you know, sweep the woman off her feet, you know, kind of thing. And this is just strictly my thing, you know, and so I sort of exaggerate the 16th a little bit instead of perfectly straight, instead of 1, 1. It's not really square, you know. So I just played just a tiny hair, you know, back. So. You know, not a real 30-second, but just so a little exaggerated rather instead of 1. Sounds really square. And then when you get to this part, now here's a really bad page turn on the bottom of this Goldberg book. So I rewrote it on the top. You don't have to make the page turn over here. And then on this figure, same thing with the 16th instead of... At number 8, here's a problem too, because in this instance, it's inconsistent. The high drum is on the top line, whereas previously the high drum was all on the bottom. And that is in the original. And again, for some reason, Stravinsky makes a system with 2 staffs, which he has in the original. So it sounds like... So now you tacit in the waltz, and it's one of those things when you have to know when you're going to come in, because it just says tacit. You know, like a lot of bar top parts, you know, all of a sudden it says tacit from, you know, 27 to 37, and they got, you know, a third trumpet cue, which you can't hear. So you have to kind of know, you know, or figure out your part. So the transition, it's an attacca from the waltz into the ragtime. Yeah. Now in the ragtime, I do it again. This is what Stravinsky says. All of the percussion is lightly struck with a triangle beat. The triangle is held in the left hand, and to the right, very near, one opposite the other, the snare and tambourine angled for the comfort of the player. At the left, the bass drum. So you saw in that picture of the old drum set, the extreme angle of the snare drum, when they played, of course, traditional grip, right? So you had the snare drum angle. So he said, okay, angle the snare drum and the tambourine one against the other like this, and play them both with a triangle. They hadn't heard of apparently a holder for the triangle, so he said, hold the triangle on left hand and play it. Now, I can't figure out how you do a grace note while you're holding it, unless, you know. Come up with an idea?
I've seen the movie.
Holding 4 mallets.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it. Yeah. Again, I don't like the sound of hitting the tambourine with the triangle beater, so I do it like this. And this is the only piece in the whole repertoire that I like an able triangle. I generally don't like them. I think they're too dinky for an orchestra triangle. Although he's used it, I guess. I find it, you know, just too small, too concentrated. But in this piece, it works. A little chamber music, everything, and it works, you know. Now again, toward the end, there's little problems with the high drum and the low drum, the upper drum. Okay. And I even have instructions in my part, remove the tambourine, put it on the chair. And there's a mistake in the ragtime in the Goldberg book. There's a 3/4 bar left out, 32. And then this is... sound you can never get with this. Yeah, these bring out one really high. But even when I play loud, you never get the bottom with these light handles like that. Now, in the Dance of the Devil, okay, now there are also interesting footnotes. It said, place the two instruments angled toward each other, very close, so that the sticks can be moved in the right hand between the heads and the indicated tempo. So what he really meant was for you to, the drums in a V shape, and the tune goes. And he said, play it like this. With a V shape, the two drums in the V. Okay. It's kind of a nice lick. And there's another very interesting thing that I found out, that in the early edition, it says with a baguette et baleine, tête and foutre dur. And that means a stick with a whalebone, a hard-felt stick with a whalebone handle. And I didn't know what he was meant, and I went to the Whaling Museum in Nantucket, and this wasn't on the film. This was and they had a sign there. They had the jaw of a whale, and they had a sign that said the baleine, there's something or other. And it turns out it's the bone on the top of your jaw here that they used to make corset stays with. For women to appear slimmer, and they have the stays in the material made of this whalebone, and it was a flexible material. So apparently a stick of the period was you mounted a felt head on this flexible thing, and you could go, it must have been like a trick, like a vaudeville kind of thing, or a trick drummer's thing. You could play all kinds of stuff, keeping this going with one hand. That got lost in the subsequent editions, and I guess now it's Save the Whale Time. That's what we use. And number 4, stems up and stems down. In this instance, I just mean a right and a left sticking. So it was also quite amazing that way back in 1918, he was giving you the actual stickings that he wanted on the drums. And it's both with the same mallets, but right and left hand sticking. Now, in this instance, here's another thing that's not exactly kosher, but since it's very soft and the hard felt sticks pop out a lot and it's quite fast, the lick goes. So I use these kind of things just to sort of take the edge off the tone. It would be pretty loud, I think, with. I have to be so gingerly about it that it's hard to control. So I just go for one, a stick with a little bit of felt cover on it. And again, there's an instance where I rewrote it because it looks really confusing to me. On this. all the stems up, stems down, plus the page turn, plus the possible. It's really confusing. And if you write it in sort of normal notation, it just looks like this.
Is that something that could be taken into consideration in these new editions that are going to be printed
Yeah.
now?
Definitely. Yeah, well, I think Gordon, we talked about that a lot, right? That, you know, yeah, and you just say play hand to hand. You know, just play it hand to hand, and it comes out like that. Okay. Now, in the original, this couplet du diable doesn't exist. That was added later for probably some stage business. And then it goes directly to the march, the triumphant march of the devil, which is the last section. Interestingly, it started way toward the middle, after number 6 in the original manuscript. Started way down here, and this is an exact, this whole first section is an exact repeat. So he probably, again, needed some more stage time, and so just put a big repeat sign in there and repeated the whole section. Here's there are instances in this last movement of things that we talked about. So this lick sort of sounds. Except it's written. So it's written in 2/4, and the lick is actually 3. Again, the high drum is on the left-hand side, the low drum on the top line on the right-hand side. So, again, that's, you know, like it was before. This is one instance where I play the whole thing sort of with heartfelt. And again, I don't use a separate stick for the cymbal. You could, you know, hold a stand up stick, but this just works fine. I don't have another concern with, you know, holding, especially there's a lot of solo passages in this last move.
And Arnie, do you play the opening of this one? Where do you play the bass drum?
Okay, so it's in the middle, at the end, sorry. Yeah, it's pretty clear, it's at the edge. This is the slide to reverse. Yeah, well, you know, the score is available. So, I mean, it's not that I found something very, you know, someone's attic or something. It is available. And I would think if you're going to be, you know, do an edition, put something in print, you should go and score the original. It's also interesting, in that score, there's a piano reduction. And Stravinsky wrote a lot of his major works originally on piano. So it's probably not a reduction. It's probably wrote it on the piano first, and then orchestrated, which is amazing to me because, you know, the Petrushka, there's a 2-piano version, the Rite of Spring, there's a piano version, and this, there's a piano version. They sound like they were written, they're orchestrated so wonderfully. It just sounds like it was written for the instrument in mind, rather than, okay, I sat down at the piano and played this thing, and now I, you know, now go the next step and orchestrate. It sounds like it's just the opposite. Like it's, you know, this incredible orchestration, especially in the Rite of Spring. You mentioned that. Petrushka on the piano. It's so astounding. But he wrote most of it at the piano, and then subsequently orchestrated.
Which score is that?
In these,
From the original, which score?
in Histoire.
Aren't there several published versions of it?
No, but I'm talking about in the original manuscript that I saw,
Yeah.
there's a piano reduction part.
But of the scores that are available today, is any one of them from the original more authentic?
The only one I think is going to be based on it. There's every one of the ones, I have a whole bunch of them here if you want to look at them. They all have certain things that are inconsistent or or leave out the footnotes or the performances. So most all of them, with the exception of the 1923, I think, leave out performance notes. It doesn't tell you what, when they the normal sticks in the years, etc. Almost kind of that nice thing that Stravinsky wrote. The other thing that I really haven't, the stems up and stems down only indicate sticking. It's not two different sticks in this case. Another thing that, I think two main things that I haven't decided about the piece are cymbal muffling, hi-hat, side cymbal, etc. And the other thing is what to do at the end. In the original, there's no dynamics. Personally, I like to just play it out, the drum solo at the end, with a crescendo. When I did it with Boulez, he said, oh, no. It's the devil marching away, marching down the road, and it should be a diminuendo. So I played it as a diminuendo, which I really don't like. This recording that I have, I don't know which one it is, just plays it absolutely flat. No dynamics at all. Just, whatever. Energy, crescendo.
Wade says that he did 6, you were there and didn't actually want anything. He was changeable on that too.
Yeah.
Robert Kraft said the majority of performances he heard, including crescendo, he was very happy.
I think Eagle collected the check and made him happy. And
Take you to the parties.
yeah, I'm only half joking, but he was a working professional, in the best sense of the word. And a lot of the details, and dilettantes, are collectors of little paraphernalia and little things. Working professionals, basically he wrote the piece and he was on to the next piece. And then the next piece and the next piece and the next piece, and he was working on, if you read some of his letters, he had arguments with the publishers about how much he was going to get paid, and Diaghilev stuck him for 5,000 francs, and they searched all over Europe looking for Diaghilev. They couldn't find him, and Beecham was going bankrupt at one point. And, these guys were just struggling. Now we see them as deities. How can a god need money? They don't need money. But they were all, scuffling and going on to the next gig and, thinking about the next piece in a healthy, very creative way. So these little minutiae that we, concern ourselves with, I don't know if Stravinsky himself was that concerned about, It sounded good, it was an exciting performance. Fine, it's good. So I personally just emotionally feel that, the piece ends with sort of the solo at the end, he wrote a whole book on rhythm. And his proposition in the book is that you don't have to write changing meaning. And if you've ever played, the marimba material, stuff like that, but it's all written in 3/4 time. And Preston's idea is, you don't have to write changing meter, and he goes to great lengths. The book is probably 150 pages long, and much of it is justifying his position about that, not writing changing meter. And he quotes Beethoven's string quartets and quotes tons of Brahms and things like that. And finally, in one section, he writes the sacrificial dance out, all in 4/8 time. And it's perfect. Every note is accounted for, but it's, for some reason, dull as it can be. It's really dull. And it's exactly right. The 8th notes are the 8th notes, 16th to 16th notes, everything mechanically is correct. The only thing I can think of is that there's a certain edginess when you play, if you're the 3/16th bar, you go, instead of, you go, certain edginess that it gives you a change in meter. Go pop. There's a certain edge that goes somehow takes away. Yeah.
Doesn't that force, actually, by writing it in 4/4, doesn't that force people to phrase it in 4/4, and that's not exactly what he wanted?
Well, that's another question that I haven't resolved in my mind.
If you jump in for a second, I think of two different issues. The first one is what Arnie alluded to earlier, which is Stravinsky loved the D phrase. He did that in this period. He was using all of it. That's why he has these weird names. But I think when Arnie was talking about the difference between odd meters, the way and if you put an odd meter type of music into a simple meter, it sounds different. It's really, that's a human element of the way we approach rhythms, which are very different. And anyone on the board will after listening, if you've ever done anything with sequences, if you sequence odd meters, they sound totally wrong. In other words, if you have a computer doing 5/8 and 7/8 and 3/4, it's unrecognizable. It's not the way we play positions. It's just different. So I think that the odd meter in Stravinsky is very in tune with the devices. What odd meters mean.
The thing about Igor is that he's out if you get a collaboration with himself. Part of it, on one level, is that he's working rhythmic schemes. That is strictly selfish. Right?
Yeah,
you don't have to know that there happen to be in certain segments of this 4 polymeters that are happening simultaneously.
So listen to this now.
Yeah, he knows very well. He knows very well. He could have easily flattened this out to the lowest common denominator. And he's giggling all the way through that. Of course, you can eventually find it, and show you where they are. 4 very often happen simultaneously. Some of these are 9/8, some of them are 3, some of them are strictly 2/4, as Arnie was saying. He's having to giggle. So you have to justify that. And then the other part is, he wasn't always performer friendly, which Arnie's talking about too. The beams are going every which way, right? But he was very happy with people making an effort to understand that, and they make part of it to represent I as well.
Yeah.
So you just have to, had to know Igor.
Yeah.
And that's part of Igor, all of that.
Beams going across the bar lines, wasn't that strictly in the interest of keeping the drum part in line with the changing rhythms in the other parts of the orchestra too? So that the drummer could be aware of, well, this is what's going on in the other sections. So, I mean,
Sometimes
it's opposite. And some of the bass lines,
well, that stays very regular.
the bass just goes pizzicatos, 8th note, 8th note rest, 8th note, 8th note rest. But I'm confident all kinds of stuff, the drummer is playing all kinds of other stuff.
there are superpositions on it. Sometimes it's concern, sometimes it's just the polymeter run its course. There are a couple of different levels of that.
I'll tell you a funny story I just thought of. We had once played a piece with kind of Egyptian, and there was a whole bunch of changing things, and it kind of complicated, not that any good graduate student could handle the notes. And not that long, funny. And, but the conductor who was conducting, I don't know who it was, got sick. And they said, okay, they could get someone to fill in for the Brown Symphony, you know, like mile down the trail. But this guy's new piece, nobody knew it. And they said, well, why don't you conduct it to this composer who came to the premiere? And at the dress rehearsal, he came up and he started conducting, and we came to this part with all the changing meter, and he kept screwing it up. We said, no, it's a 3/8 bar, not a 4/8. He kept messing it up. Finally, God, if I knew I would have had a conductor, I wouldn't have made it so hard. So, you know, you have to say, well, is there a real justification for writing? And the thing is, that one of the things that I have totally solved in my mind is, do you accentuate according to the bar lines? If you're playing a Brahms symphony, for example, you surely would not accentuate bar lines. You know, so you don't think in terms of bar lines. But there are certain things in Stravinsky, you know, that bring out certain little accentuations to help the rhythm, you know, to understand the rhythm. Anybody else?
Especially that one little thing about the hi-hat. I mean, the old practice in the 60s, brought out the hi-hat, actually the marches, rather than so he actually was simulating a marching band sound. And the thing is that when Bill actually pointed to the hi-hat and said, well, look, I've got something here I'd like to show you, Igor came out with, but that is jazz, J-A-S-S, but that is jazz. He was very worried at the near side of it, which tells you a little something too about it. So then he said, no, close your eyes and check it out. And Bill proceeded to play the bass drum and the hi-hat, which he had seated next to him. Played them together. Yes! That's it! Now he found he really liked that sound. Again, you have to justify the muffling on it. And Bill probably had his body against it, you know, figure out a few things, because he had a closer proximity to the bass drum. I like what Arnie does there too, I totally agree with you.
So what I've done is just open, you know, the hi-hat up enough to, yeah, just find the spot that's above. So it's sort of knocked up and stuff.
Actually, we stick for 14.
Yes. Take it in.
What do you suppose he did with the bass drum? Because presumably it was a pedal drum.
He says...
No, I mean presumably the drum set itself that he got.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I can find out, there was a technique very prevalent at the time where they would play with the pedal, but they would also hit the drum upright this way. So you'd be playing with the, you know, you'd be playing like... and then hit the drum. Back, playing it with a stick on the bass drum this way. So again, those are one of the things that I'm not convinced that. In James Blaine's book, it shows you there's a picture of the first performance in Great Britain, and it looks like it's a stand-up, you know, not straight up bass drum with the pedal.
Is there anything in the performance notes that specifically precludes the use of a pedal bass drum?
No. Well, but how do you get center of an edge? How do you go?
I mean, obviously playing it also, but
Yeah.
I mean, for some of the sections where it would save the player an extra, you know, hand, or, you know, that's...
But he specifies my up.
Yeah, specifies.
Okay, well, that's a good, yeah.
Would they make French leaders on the pedal?
Amy? Ask Amy.
I mean, that's such a shame to have done traditional.
Double bass drum, of course. It is two double.
I mean, as far as I remember, they were just real furry, kind of, and it was sort of That doesn't. I think now, you know, if you think of the products that are available now, you know, I don't think there were as many, you know, as many drum companies, for example. But there were, you know, a lot of, no, maybe I'm wrong. There were a lot of companies that were making drum equipment. And there were probably, you know, lots of small companies, Warburg and all. Duplex was another company that I know of. And there's probably lots of kooky kinds of equipment around. As you know, what's a drum now? What's a drum set now? I mean, you go, you get a Tommy, you get a Pearl, you get a, you know, a Ludwig, and you get power toms, you get, you know, so there's probably all different kinds of drum set sizes available to people at that time. I am not of the opinion that, you know, Baroque timpani with these little dinky things that they'll show you, and you know, drums with these little dumb things that they show you in a lot of books. I think that people would have a concept of sound and would work to get an appropriate, you know, or what they thought was a good sound. There were big timpani available, you know, full-size timpani available, and I'm sure there were good timpani players and round timpani players, and you know, good sticks and four sticks, and you know, in fact, Berlioz and Snell's complains about some of the timpani players in the house, you know, some like him, and you know, and it's just like now, you know, you like certain styles, you know, better than others, and people make gadgets and make sticks, and you know, just like in 30 years, or what is this piece? Like, you know, 50, 60 years old piece. People, 80 years old. Is 80 years from now, someone going to know what an M4 mallet is, you know, or Goodman Greens, or you know, something like that. You know, it's very unlikely. So that's exactly, you know, I think it was writing for the instrumentation. Anybody else? Okay, I'd like to thank you.
Thank you all.
The article and check it against the Goldberg book. Correct your own part.
I'm trying.
Playing my tape.